Existence is not what most people think it is. It hides beneath the routines of daily life, silent yet relentless, waiting for the moment we finally ask the most dangerous question a human mind can face. What does it mean to be? For centuries, Western philosophy chased things rather than the mystery that allows things to appear at all. Philosophers analyzed objects, categories, substances, and systems, yet the deeper ground remained strangely ignored. The simple word being stood at the center of thought, but its meaning slipped through every definition. Before the modern world accelerated into noise and distraction, one thinker turned sharply toward this forgotten question. Martin Heidegger confronted the very foundation of existence itself. Instead of asking what exists, he demanded something far more unsettling. What makes existence possible in the first place? This shift was not a minor correction in philosophy. It was an intellectual earthquake. Heidegger argued that philosophy had quietly forgotten the meaning of being for thousands of years. While thinkers from Plato to Aristotle examined entities, they rarely asked why beings can appear as beings at all. Heidegger stripped philosophy back to its rawest ground and forced the question into the open. But this is not merely an academic problem buried in ancient texts. It is a problem that reaches directly into the interior of every human life. To ask about being is to confront anxiety, time, mortality, and the fragile meaning of our own existence. Philosophy, in Heidegger's vision, becomes an excavation of the human condition itself. Before we continue, you are gently invited to subscribe, leave a like, and share a comment. This channel is a small space for grounding and reflection, created for those who seek a calmer way of understanding themselves and the world. If you feel comfortable, tell us where you are and what time it is for you. Your presence here matters, and your words help weave a quiet community across the distance. May what follows bring you ease, clarity, and a softer place to rest your thoughts. Now we begin with the first step of Heidegger's radical inquiry, the forgotten question of philosophy itself. What does it truly mean to be? And why has humanity spent centuries avoiding the question that defines its existence, even in the restless technological age of 2025? The greatest failure of Western philosophy is not that it lacked answers. The real failure is that it forgot the most dangerous question of all, what it means to be. For centuries, philosophers believed they were exploring reality. They built systems, categories, definitions. They analyzed objects, substances, ideas, and causes. Yet beneath this monumental intellectual architecture, something essential quietly disappeared. The question of being itself vanished from view. Before modern philosophy became obsessed with knowledge, before science reorganized the world into measurable structures, one thinker forced this buried problem back into the open. Martin Heidegger did not begin with the question of what exists. He began with a deeper rupture. What does it mean for anything to exist at all? This question appears simple. It is not. It is the most radical question philosophy can ask. Western philosophy since Plato focused on beings rather than being. Philosophers analyzed things, objects, ideas, substances, causes. The tradition constructed elaborate theories explaining how entities appear, change, and relate. Yet it rarely stopped to ask what allows something to appear as existing in the first place. This shift may seem subtle. It is not subtle. It changed the entire destiny of philosophy. When Plato described the world of forms, he explained the structure of reality but left untouched the deeper condition that allows reality to appear. Aristotle examined substance, essence, and causality, but did not reopen the question of being itself. Later thinkers refined logic, knowledge, and metaphysics, but the ground beneath these systems remained unquestioned. Heidegger called this historical process the forgetting of being. This forgetting did not happen by accident. It emerged from a powerful intellectual habit. Humans naturally focus on things. We notice objects, tools, people, events. Our attention moves toward what is present before us. Rarely do we question the condition that makes presence possible. Philosophy followed the same instinct. Instead of asking what it means for something to be, philosophy classified what is. It built metaphysical maps of the world. It divided reality into categories: substance and attribute, mind and matter, subject and object. Each step looked like progress, yet each step moved further away from the original question. Heidegger exposes this blindness with ruthless clarity. He insists that being is not another object among objects. It cannot be placed beside things and studied like a specimen. Being is the open field within which anything can appear at all. This insight changes the entire orientation of thought. To understand the depth of this claim, we must confront a disturbing possibility. Humanity has been thinking for more than 2,000 years. Entire civilizations have been shaped by philosophical systems. Universities, religions, sciences, and political theories all stand on these foundations. And yet, the most basic philosophical question may have been abandoned at the very beginning. What does it mean to say that something is? The shock of Heidegger's project lies precisely here. He does not offer another theory of the universe. He does not compete with previous metaphysical systems. Instead, he dismantles the assumption that these systems ever addressed the true problem. He demands that philosophy return to its most primitive question. This demand is not merely academic. It reaches into the structure of human existence itself. Modern humanity believes it understands reality better than any previous age. Science measures galaxies and particles. Technology reshapes the planet. Information flows across continents instantly. The world seems transparent to calculation and control. Yet this technological clarity hides a deeper blindness. The more efficiently we manipulate things, the less we question the meaning of their existence. The world becomes a collection of resources. Objects become tools. Even human beings begin to appear as functions within systems. The language of efficiency replaces the language of being. Heidegger saw this transformation long before the digital age intensified it. He understood that when the question of being disappears, human life quietly loses its depth. Reality becomes flat. Everything is reduced to usefulness, productivity, and measurable outcomes. The cost is existential. Without the question of being, existence becomes mechanical. Life is experienced as a sequence of tasks rather than a mystery demanding reflection. People move through routines without confronting the deeper structure of their presence in the world. But Heidegger insists that something inside us resists this flattening. There are moments when the ordinary structure of life cracks open. Anxiety appears without clear cause. Boredom stretches time into emptiness. A sudden awareness emerges that our existence is not guaranteed, not fixed, not fully understood. These experiences are not psychological accidents, they are philosophical revelations. They expose the fragility of being. Anxiety, in particular, strips away the illusions of everyday certainty. In anxiety, the familiar world loses its stability. Objects no longer feel completely meaningful. Roles and identities appear fragile. The individual confronts a strange realization that existence itself is not obvious. Something is happening beneath the surface of ordinary life. Heidegger interprets this moment as the reappearance of the forgotten question. Anxiety silently asks what it means that anything exists at all. The ground of reality trembles. Most people quickly escape this confrontation. They return to distractions, routines, social expectations. The question retreats once again into silence. Yet philosophy begins precisely where this silence breaks. To ask about being is to challenge the deepest assumptions of human thought. It requires stepping outside the habitual focus on objects and turning attention toward the very openness that allows objects to appear. This movement is difficult because language itself pushes us toward things. Grammar forces us to speak about subjects and objects, causes and effects. The structure of speech hides the deeper dimension that Heidegger tries to uncover. Even the word being resists explanation. It cannot be defined like an object. Every attempt to define it already presupposes the very phenomenon it tries to capture. Being is not a property added to things. It is the condition that allows things to appear as meaningful presences. In other words, being is not something we observe from outside. It is a horizon within which observation becomes possible. This realization changes the role of philosophy. Philosophy is no longer a discipline that constructs theories about the universe. Instead, it becomes an excavation, a careful uncovering of the forgotten foundations of human understanding. Heidegger describes this work as a destruction of metaphysics. Not destruction in the sense of rejection, but in the sense of dismantling inherited assumptions so the original question can appear again. This intellectual excavation reaches back through the entire Western tradition. Plato, Aristotle, medieval theology, modern rationalism, scientific objectivism. Each stage reveals a gradual shift away from the question of being toward the analysis of entities. The result is a civilization that knows more and more about things, while understanding less and less about existence itself. The paradox is striking. Humanity can split the atom, map the genome, and simulate intelligence, yet still struggle to answer a question that a child could ask. Why is there something rather than nothing? Heidegger does not treat this question as a puzzle to be solved. He treats it as a doorway. Entering this doorway transforms the way we experience reality. When the question of being returns, the world no longer appears as a collection of neutral objects. Everything becomes charged with significance. Existence itself becomes a phenomenon that demands interpretation. At this point, philosophy leaves the realm of abstract speculation and enters the domain of human life. Because the question of being is not asked by stones or machines. It is asked by a particular kind of being, a being that does not merely exist, but wonders about its own existence. This realization introduces a decisive turn in Heidegger's thinking. If the question of being has been forgotten, we must ask who is capable of remembering it. If the meaning of existence must be uncovered, we must examine the being for whom existence is already an issue. This being is the human being. Yet Heidegger refuses to treat the human as just another object in the universe. Humans are not merely biological organisms or psychological systems. They are the place where the question of being becomes possible. The human being stands inside existence while simultaneously questioning it. In everyday life, this extraordinary position remains hidden. People are absorbed in tasks, conversations, and social expectations. They rarely notice the strange fact that they are beings who relate to their own existence. But once the forgotten question returns, this hidden structure begins to reveal itself. The investigation of being, therefore, leads inevitably to the investigation of the human being who asks about it. And at this point, the philosophical path opens toward a new and unsettling discovery. The human being is not simply an observer of existence. The human being is the very site where existence discloses itself. The human being is not simply one object among others. The human being is the opening through which existence becomes visible. This is the radical insight that forces philosophy to change direction. If the question of being must be asked again, it cannot begin with abstract theories or cosmic structures. It must begin with the one being who already lives inside this question, even when unaware of it. Martin Heidegger names this being with a word that sounds strange, but carries enormous philosophical weight: Dasein. The term literally means being there. Not a creature that merely exists, a presence that stands inside the world, while simultaneously confronting the fact that it exists. Before psychology tried to explain human behavior, and before modern science reduced consciousness to brain processes, Heidegger saw something deeper. The human being is not simply alive. The human being is the being for whom existence itself becomes a problem. Animals live, stones exist, machines operate, but none of them stand before their own existence, asking what it means to be. Dasein does. This difference is not small. It marks the boundary between simple existence and existential awareness. Heidegger does not describe the human being as a detached, thinking subject observing the world from outside. That picture belongs to the long tradition of modern philosophy, especially the model inherited from Descartes, where the mind stands apart from the world and analyzes it like a scientist examining objects. Heidegger breaks this model completely. The human being does not first exist as a thinking subject and then look outward toward the world. Instead, the human being always already finds itself in a world, surrounded by meanings, engaged in activities, entangled in relationships. Dasein is never isolated. The word being there reveals something essential. Human existence is not a closed container of thoughts. It is a presence thrown into a field of significance that already existed before the individual arrived. We are born into languages we did not create, cultures we did not design, histories we did not choose, expectations that shape our possibilities long before we become aware of them. Dasein awakens inside a world that is already unfolding. This condition is what Heidegger calls thrownness. The human being does not decide the fundamental starting point of existence. One day, consciousness appears and finds itself already embedded in time, place, and circumstance. This discovery can feel unsettling. We often imagine ourselves as self-determined individuals, crafting our lives from pure freedom. Yet, the deeper structure of existence reveals something more complex. We begin not with choice, but with situation, family, language, social structures, historical moment, biological limits. None of these are chosen. They form the horizon within which choices become possible. Yet Heidegger does not describe thrownness as imprisonment. Instead, it reveals the dramatic structure of human existence. Dasein stands at the intersection between fact and possibility. We inherit a situation, but we must still decide what to do with it. This tension creates the unique character of human life. A stone simply lies where it falls. An animal follows instinct. But Dasein confronts its own existence as something unfinished. The human being is not merely what it is what it might become. This orientation toward possibility is the second defining structure of Dasein. Human existence constantly projects itself forward. We live not only in the present moment, but toward the future we imagine and pursue. Every decision opens some possibilities while closing others. Every path chosen silently eliminates countless alternatives. Even refusing to choose becomes a form of choice. Life, therefore, unfolds as a project. Yet most people rarely experience their lives in this clear existential way. Everyday existence is filled with routines, distractions, and social expectations that cover over the deeper structure of possibility. People wake up, perform tasks, fulfill roles, follow habits. They speak in phrases inherited from others. They pursue goals that society presents as obvious. In this ordinary flow, something important becomes hidden. The individual forgets that existence itself is at stake. Heidegger insists that Dasein is the place where being reveals itself. But this revelation is fragile. It can easily disappear beneath the noise of everyday life. Human beings often drift into a mode of existence where they no longer question their lives. They follow patterns established by the surrounding culture. Opinions are borrowed. Desires are shaped by imitation. Even ambitions often originate from collective expectations rather than personal reflection. This condition produces a strange paradox. That being uniquely capable of asking the question of existence often lives without asking it at all. Dasein possesses the potential for radical self-understanding, yet most of the time this potential remains dormant. Life becomes absorbed in what is familiar and socially approved. Heidegger sees this not as a moral failure, but as an existential tendency. Everyday life pulls the individual toward conformity because conformity provides comfort. When everyone follows the same path, the burden of questioning disappears. Yet beneath this comfort, a deeper unease slowly grows. There are moments when routine suddenly loses its transparency. A person pauses in the middle of ordinary activity and senses something strange about existence itself. The familiar world feels slightly unstable. The individual becomes aware that life is not simply a sequence of tasks, but an open field of possibilities that demand decision. In such moments, Dasein glimpses its true condition. The human being is not defined by fixed essence. There is no predetermined blueprint dictating what one must become. Instead, existence precedes definition. We must create ourselves through the choices we make. This freedom is both empowering and terrifying. Freedom means the individual cannot fully hide behind circumstances. Even when situations limit options, the responsibility for choosing remains. Every life becomes a narrative written through actions rather than predetermined by nature. Heidegger does not romanticize this freedom. He emphasizes its weight. To exist as Dasein means carrying the burden of possibility. Every moment contains unrealized paths. Every decision shapes the trajectory of a life that will never be repeated. The individual stands exposed before existence. Yet this exposure also reveals something extraordinary. The human being is not merely a biological organism surviving in an environment. The human being is the clearing in which the world becomes meaningful. Through Dasein, objects become tools, words become language, actions become projects, and events become history. Without this opening presence, the world would not appear as a world at all. It would remain an indifferent field of matter without meaning or significance. Dasein, therefore, occupies a unique position in the structure of reality. It is not the ruler of the universe, but it is the place where the universe becomes intelligible. This insight dissolves the rigid boundary between subject and object that dominated earlier philosophy. The human being is not a detached observer confronting an external reality. Instead, the human being and the world emerge together in a shared field of meaning. Existence is always existence in a world. When Heidegger studies Dasein, he is not studying a psychological individual. He is uncovering the fundamental structure of human existence itself. The investigation moves beneath personal traits and cultural differences to reveal the deeper patterns that define what it means to be human. These patterns shape every life, whether recognized or not. The individual may ignore the question of existence. Society may encourage distraction. Technology may surround us with constant stimulation. Yet the structure of Dasein continues to operate beneath these surfaces. We are beings who must interpret our own existence. This interpretation never reaches final completion. Life continues unfolding. Possibilities appear and vanish. Understanding deepens and collapses. The individual constantly redefines who they are through new choices and experiences. Dasein therefore lives in a state of unfinished understanding. But something even more profound emerges when we examine this structure closely. The human being does not encounter the world first as a collection of neutral objects waiting to be analyzed. Instead, the world already appears filled with meaning. Tools appear as usable. Places appear as familiar or threatening. People appear as companions, rivals, or strangers. Activities appear as necessary, optional, or meaningless. The world arrives already interpreted. This reveals a decisive shift in philosophical thinking. The human being does not first exist and then later connect with the world. From the very beginning, existence unfolds within a meaningful environment. Dasein is never outside the world looking in. Dasein is always already inside it. And once this realization becomes unavoidable, another transformation follows naturally. If the human being is inseparable from the world it inhabits, then understanding existence requires examining the deep structure of this inseparable relationship. The human being does not stand outside the world observing it. The human being is already inside the world before any observation begins. This is the next rupture in Heidegger's philosophy. The traditional image of the human mind watching reality from a distance collapses completely. The separation between subject and object, thinker and world, dissolves under closer inspection. Human existence is never detached. It is always embedded. Heidegger names this condition with a phrase that sounds simple, yet carries enormous weight: being in the world. This phrase does not describe a location. It describes the structure of existence itself. To exist as a human being is not to occupy a position inside a container called the world. It is to participate in a web of relationships, meanings, and activities that shape every moment of life. The world is not an external stage where human beings perform actions. The world is the living field within which existence unfolds. The difference is radical. Western philosophy for centuries imagined the mind as an observer confronting a set of objects. Reality appeared as a collection of things waiting to be analyzed, categorized, and explained. The human being was positioned as a detached subject, standing before the universe like a scientist examining a laboratory specimen. Heidegger destroys this image. Before we ever analyze objects, we are already engaged with them. Before we ever think about the world, we are already living within it. Existence begins not with contemplation, but with involvement. Consider the simplest moment of daily life. When a person wakes in the morning, they do not encounter a neutral field of objects that must first be identified through philosophical reflection. They immediately recognize the room, the bed, the door, the window, the phone, the clothes. Each item already carries meaning. The bed invites rest. The door suggests passage. The phone promises communication. The clothes indicate social presence. The world is not experienced as raw matter. It appears as significance. This insight reveals something essential about human existence. The world is always a meaningful world. Dasein does not first encounter meaningless objects and then later assign value to them. Meaning is already there in the way things appear. Objects show themselves within networks of purpose and use. This is why Heidegger insists that human existence cannot be understood by isolating the individual mind. The individual only makes sense within the environment of meaning that surrounds it. Being in the world, therefore, describes a unity. Human existence and the world belong together. The human being shapes the world through interpretation and action. At the same time, the world shapes the human being through possibilities, limitations, and inherited structures. This reciprocal relationship defines everyday life. We move through spaces that guide our behavior. Streets lead toward destinations. Buildings organize activity. Tools direct our hands toward certain actions. Language shapes the thoughts we can express. The world quietly directs existence long before we consciously reflect on it. Heidegger calls attention to this hidden structure because it reveals something that philosophy had long ignored. The primary way humans encounter reality is not through detached thinking, but through practical engagement. We do not first observe a hammer as an object with measurable properties. We encounter it as something to build with. Its meaning appears through use. The same is true for nearly everything in our environment. A chair is something to sit on. A road is something to travel along. A book is something to read. A keyboard is something to type on. These meanings are not theoretical conclusions reached through analysis. They are immediate. They arise from participation in everyday life. The world appears as a landscape of possibilities for action. This practical orientation explains why human understanding is always situated. We interpret the world from within our projects, concerns, and goals. A carpenter sees wood differently from a sculptor. A doctor sees the body differently from an athlete. A musician hears sound differently from a physicist. The world changes depending on how we are involved in it. Heidegger calls this structure involvement. Human beings are not neutral observers, but participants whose activities shape how reality appears. Yet something even deeper hides beneath this insight. Because if the world always appears through involvement, then understanding reality requires examining the network of relationships that give objects their meaning. No tool exists in isolation. Every object belongs to a chain of purposes. A hammer refers to nails. Nails refer to wood. Wood refers to building. Building refers to shelter. Shelter refers to human dwelling. Objects form a web of significance. This web is what Heidegger calls the worldhood of the world. The world is not merely the sum of physical things. It is the structure of meanings that connect those things into a coherent environment for human life. Remove these meanings, and the world collapses into meaningless matter. This insight explains why the world can suddenly feel strange in certain moments. When familiar structures break down, objects lose their transparency. A tool that suddenly stops working reveals itself not merely as equipment, but as a physical object that demands attention. The smooth flow of activity is interrupted. The individual becomes aware of the fragile network that normally makes life effortless. Breakdowns reveal the hidden architecture of the world. Most of the time, this architecture remains invisible because it functions smoothly. We move through activities without thinking about them. Tools work. Language flows. Social roles operate automatically. But when disruption occurs, the background structure suddenly becomes visible. Heidegger uses these moments to expose the deeper truth of being in the world. The world is not something we first analyze and then use. It is something we inhabit. We dwell within a landscape of significance. This dwelling shapes identity itself. The individual does not possess a fixed essence that remains unchanged regardless of environment. Identity emerges through relationships with the world, the roles we perform, the tools we use, the people we interact with, and the projects we pursue all contribute to who we become. Human existence, therefore, unfolds through activity. To live is to be engaged. Even silence contains involvement. Even rest carries intention. The structure of being in the world ensures that every moment of life unfolds within a network of meaning. Yet, this network also hides a danger, because the more smoothly everyday life functions, the less we notice the deeper structure of our existence. The world becomes familiar to the point of invisibility. Activities repeat, roles stabilize, expectations harden. Gradually, the individual stops questioning the environment that shapes their life. The world begins to feel obvious. But Heidegger insists that this sense of obviousness is deceptive. The world is not a fixed container. It is a fragile web of meaning constantly sustained by human participation. When people stop questioning this web, they risk losing contact with the deeper possibilities of existence. The routines of daily life can slowly trap the individual within patterns established by others. Social expectations begin to dictate behavior. Language repeats inherited opinions. Decisions follow the path of least resistance. The world that once revealed possibilities becomes a structure of quiet pressure. At this point, the individual no longer experiences being in the world as an open field of meaning. Instead, the world begins to dictate how one must think, speak, and act. A subtle transformation occurs. The individual no longer lives authentically within the world. The individual begins to dissolve into the anonymous expectations of society. And in this transformation, another hidden force emerges quietly within everyday life. The world does not first appear as a collection of objects. It appears as a network of tools. This claim cuts directly through the habits of Western metaphysics. Philosophy has long assumed that reality presents itself primarily as things with properties. Tables possess weight. Stones occupy space. Objects exist with measurable characteristics that can be studied from a distance. But Heidegger forces us to confront a more uncomfortable truth. In everyday life, we do not encounter objects in this detached way. We encounter them through use. A hammer does not first appear as a physical structure made of wood and metal. It appears as something to build with. A door does not present itself as a rectangular arrangement of materials. It appears as something to open. A keyboard does not arrive as plastic and circuitry. It appears as something through which words enter the world. The world is encountered through action before it is encountered through theory. Heidegger calls this mode of appearance readiness for use. A tool reveals itself through the task it serves. Its meaning lies not in its isolated properties, but in the role it plays within a larger activity. This shift in perspective transforms the way reality is understood. Traditional philosophy isolates objects in order to analyze them. Heidegger shows that such isolation is artificial. In lived experience, tools never stand alone. Each one refers silently to others. A hammer points toward nails. Nails point toward wood. Wood points toward construction. Construction points toward shelter. Shelter points toward dwelling. Every tool belongs to a chain of purposes. The world therefore forms a web of references. Nothing exists purely by itself. Each object carries meaning only through its relation to the broader field of human activity. This web of references is what gives the world coherence. When a carpenter enters a workshop, the environment does not appear as scattered objects. It appears as an organized system of possibilities. The saw, the hammer, the wood, the measuring tape, all exist within a unified project. The workshop reveals itself as a place for building. The same structure appears everywhere in daily life. A kitchen organizes tools for cooking. A library organizes objects for reading. A city organizes spaces for movement and exchange. Each environment gathers objects into networks of significance. Heidegger calls this structure the totality of involvement. Every tool participates in a larger pattern of activity that gives it meaning. This insight exposes a fundamental misunderstanding in earlier philosophy. The tradition believed that objects possess meaning independently of human engagement. Heidegger reverses this assumption. Meaning arises from participation. A tool becomes intelligible only when placed within the network of purposes that defines its role. Outside this network, the object becomes strangely mute. Imagine holding a tool whose purpose you do not understand. Its shape appears confusing. Its presence seems mysterious. Only when its function becomes clear does the object fully reveal itself. The world, therefore, depends on interpretation. Human beings do not merely observe reality. They uncover significance within it through practical engagement. The structure of tools, activities, and purposes creates the intelligible world that surrounds us. Yet, most of the time, this structure remains invisible. When tools function smoothly, they disappear into the background of activity. A skilled carpenter does not constantly think about the hammer in his hand. The tool becomes an extension of action. Attention flows toward the project rather than toward the instrument. This disappearance is not accidental. It reveals the true nature of readiness for use. A tool is most fully itself when it withdraws from attention and allows the activity to proceed. The hammer fulfills its meaning precisely when it becomes almost invisible within the act of building. The same happens with countless objects in daily life. We do not constantly examine the chair we sit on or the door we open. The world operates silently beneath our awareness. But this silence can break. When a tool stops functioning, the hidden structure of the world suddenly becomes visible. The hammer slips, the computer freezes, the door refuses to open. In that instant, the smooth flow of activity collapses. The object that once disappeared into the background now demands attention. We notice its physical properties, its weight, its resistance, its malfunction. The tool becomes an object. This moment of breakdown reveals something crucial. The theoretical perspective of traditional philosophy emerges not from ordinary experience, but from disruption. Only when tools fail do we step back and analyze them as objects with properties. In other words, theoretical observation is secondary. The primary mode of human existence is practical involvement. Heidegger uses this insight to dismantle the long-standing image of the detached observer. Human beings are not first thinkers who later act. They are actors who sometimes step back to think. Action precedes analysis. The world that surrounds us is therefore not primarily a collection of physical substances. It is a landscape of possibilities, shaped by human projects. Every object participates in a network of use that reflects the goals, needs, and aspirations of those who inhabit it. This perspective reveals the intimate relationship between meaning and human life. Tools do not merely assist our activities, they express our orientation toward the world. The architecture of a city reflects how a society organizes movement and interaction. The design of a smartphone reflects how communication and information have become central to modern existence. Objects carry the imprint of human intention. Yet Heidegger warns that this relationship contains a hidden danger. Because when the world becomes entirely organized around usefulness, the deeper question of existence begins to fade once again. The web of tools can slowly transform reality into a field of pure functionality. Everything begins to appear only in terms of what it can do. A forest becomes timber, a river becomes energy, land becomes real estate. Even human beings begin to appear as resources within systems of production. The language of utility spreads everywhere. In such a world, objects lose their mystery. Everything becomes calculable, predictable, manageable. The web of tools expands until it covers the entire horizon of experience. But beneath this efficiency, something essential disappears. The more the world becomes organized as a network of functions, the less we encounter it as a place of meaning that exceeds our control. The forest no longer stands as a living presence. It appears only as material waiting to be processed. The river no longer flows as a natural phenomenon. It appears as a source of energy. The world becomes a system. Heidegger does not reject tools themselves. Tools belong to the fundamental structure of being in the world. Human existence always unfolds through practical engagement. The danger lies in forgetting that the web of tools is not the ultimate truth of reality. When usefulness becomes the only lens through which the world is seen, existence itself becomes hidden once more. Everything becomes reduced to its function within human projects. The world loses depth. This reduction quietly shapes the psychology of modern life. Individuals begin to evaluate themselves according to productivity. Time becomes measured by efficiency. Relationships become organized around utility. Even identity begins to resemble a tool. A person becomes valuable according to performance, skills, and output. The deeper question of who one is beneath these roles fades into the background. Heidegger sees this transformation as a symptom of a deeper forgetting. The world of tools has expanded so powerfully that it risks absorbing human existence itself. Instead of tools serving life, life begins to serve the system of tools. Yet something within human experience continues to resist this transformation. Because even within the most efficient environment, moments of unease appear. A sense of emptiness emerges despite technological success. Individuals begin to feel that something essential has slipped away beneath the surface of progress. This unease signals a deeper problem. The networks of usefulness that structure everyday life also shape how people understand themselves. Individuals gradually absorb the expectations embedded within these systems. They speak the language of productivity. They pursue goals defined by collective standards. Without realizing it, they begin to live according to patterns established by an anonymous social order. And within this order, a new force quietly governs everyday existence. Human beings rarely rule their own existence. Most of the time, they disappear into the crowd. This is one of Heidegger's most unsettling revelations. After uncovering how human beings live within networks of tools and purposes, he exposes another hidden structure shaping everyday life. Beneath routines, conversations, and shared habits operates a silent force that absorbs individuality. Heidegger calls this force the they. The they is not a specific group of people. It is not a government, an institution, or a visible authority. The they is the anonymous voice of society that quietly dictates what one should think, desire, fear, and pursue. It speaks everywhere and nowhere. People say that one must be successful. People say that one should follow a stable career. People say that certain lifestyles are admirable and others are foolish. These phrases appear harmless, even obvious. But Heidegger asks a dangerous question. Who exactly is this one that everyone obeys? The answer is disturbing. No individual stands behind these commands. The authority of the they emerges from collective anonymity. It is the pressure of social expectation without a clear origin. And because it has no face, it becomes incredibly powerful. Most human beings grow up inside this atmosphere long before they become aware of it. Families, schools, media, and communities transmit patterns of thought that appear natural. Individuals inherit opinions, ambitions, and fears that feel personal even when they are not. The individual gradually learns how to behave, speak in certain ways, dress in acceptable forms, pursue recognized goals, avoid actions that might appear strange or unacceptable, seek approval from the invisible audience of society. This process feels ordinary. It is rarely questioned. But Heidegger reveals that this ordinary life hides a profound transformation. The individual slowly dissolves into the expectations of the they. Personal existence becomes shaped by anonymous standards. Identity becomes borrowed. The individual no longer asks what it truly means to live. Instead, the individual asks what people usually do. Decisions become guided by imitation rather than reflection. This imitation creates a strange comfort. Living according to the they provides safety. One does not need to confront the terrifying freedom of existence. The path appears already prepared. Society offers instructions for how life should unfold. Study, work, achieve recognition, accumulate possessions, maintain appearances. These goals promise stability. They offer reassurance that life is progressing in the correct direction. But beneath this reassurance, Heidegger detects a quiet tragedy. Because when individuals surrender to the they lose contact with the deeper question of existence. The unique possibility of living authentically disappears beneath collective routines. The individual becomes interchangeable. Heidegger describes everyday life within the they using several revealing patterns. The first is idle talk. Idle talk does not mean meaningless chatter alone. It describes the way language circulates within society without genuine understanding. Opinions repeat themselves. Phrases spread through conversations. Judgments appear ready-made. People speak about everything without truly encountering the reality behind their words. News is discussed. Moral positions are declared. Trends are analyzed. Yet beneath the flow of language, little genuine reflection occurs. Words replace understanding. Idle talk creates the illusion of knowledge. The second pattern is curiosity. Curiosity in this context does not mean deep inquiry. It refers to the restless desire to see everything without dwelling on anything. Attention jumps from topic to topic. Information is consumed rapidly and forgotten just as quickly. The modern world amplifies this pattern with relentless intensity. Screens deliver endless streams of content. Headlines replace contemplation. Individuals scroll through fragments of experience without truly encountering them. The result is a constant stimulation that hides existential emptiness. The third pattern is ambiguity. Within the atmosphere of the they, nothing becomes entirely clear. Everything appears partially understood, yet never fully examined. Opinions circulate without accountability. People assume that understanding already exists because everyone seems to share the same language. Ambiguity protects individuals from confronting uncomfortable questions. Together, these patterns form the structure of everyday social existence. Idle talk spreads superficial knowledge. Curiosity produces constant distraction. Ambiguity prevents genuine clarity. The individual floats within this environment without realizing how deeply it shapes perception. Heidegger calls this condition falling. Dasein falls away from its own possibilities into the comfort of the crowd. Instead of confronting the open question of existence, it dissolves into familiar roles defined by the they. Falling does not feel dramatic. It feels normal. People wake up, perform expected tasks, repeat accepted opinions, pursue socially approved goals. Life appears orderly and predictable. Yet beneath this order, something essential remains unexamined. The individual rarely asks why these goals matter. Why must success follow this particular pattern? Why must happiness resemble the images displayed by society? Why must life be evaluated according to standards that few people consciously choose? These questions remain buried. The power of the they lies precisely in this invisibility. Because no single person enforces its authority, individuals believe they are acting freely, yet their choices often mirror the collective patterns surrounding them. Authentic reflection becomes rare. Heidegger does not accuse society of malicious control. The they emerges naturally wherever humans live together. Shared norms simplify interaction. Common expectations create stability. Social patterns allow complex communities to function. But the price of this stability is existential forgetfulness. The individual gradually loses the courage to stand apart from the crowd. Unique possibilities are abandoned in favor of socially recognized paths. Even rebellion often becomes another predictable pattern within the system. Authenticity fades. The tragedy is subtle. Life may appear successful according to social standards, while remaining deeply disconnected from personal truth. A person may achieve recognition, wealth, and approval, yet still feel an inexplicable emptiness, because the life being lived is not truly their own. Heidegger insists that this condition defines the majority of human existence. Most people remain absorbed in the they throughout their lives. The routines of society provide enough comfort to prevent deeper questioning. But occasionally, something disrupts this absorption. A sudden silence appears within the noise of everyday life. The familiar voices of society grow strangely distant. The individual feels a quiet unease that cannot be explained by ordinary problems. Success no longer satisfies. Distraction no longer distracts. The individual senses that beneath the patterns of the they lies another dimension of existence waiting to be confronted. This moment does not arrive through logical argument. It emerges through experience. Sometimes it appears during profound boredom, when the routines of life feel hollow. Sometimes it arises during unexpected solitude, when the social mask falls away. Sometimes it surfaces in moments of crisis, when the structures of everyday life collapse. In such moments, the authority of the they begins to weaken. The individual glimpses the possibility of a different mode of existence, a life not dictated by anonymous expectations, but shaped by personal confrontation with existence itself. Yet this awakening is fragile. The comfort of the they quickly returns. Social pressures reassert themselves. Familiar voices whisper that such questioning is unnecessary, impractical, even dangerous. Most people retreat. But Heidegger believes that certain experiences have the power to break through this retreat completely. Experiences that do not merely question social norms, but expose the very ground of human existence. And among these experiences, one stands above all others. An experience that strips away the illusions of everyday life and forces the individual to confront the raw structure of existence itself. Anxiety is not weakness. Anxiety is revelation. Most people treat anxiety as a problem to eliminate, a disturbance in the mind, a malfunction in the nervous system, something to suppress with distraction, medication, or constant activity. But Heidegger tears away this comforting misunderstanding. Anxiety is not merely a psychological state. It is a philosophical event. Anxiety reveals the truth of existence. To understand this claim, we must first abandon the common belief that emotions are simply internal feelings. According to everyday thinking, emotions belong inside the mind. They are reactions to external events. Happiness appears when life goes well. Fear appears when danger approaches. Sadness appears when something is lost. But Heidegger forces a deeper question. What if emotions are not merely reactions? What if they are ways in which the world itself becomes visible? He calls these fundamental orientations moods. A mood is not simply a feeling inside the individual. A mood is a lens through which reality appears. It colors the entire world. It shapes how things matter, how time moves, how existence is experienced. When someone is joyful, the world opens with possibilities. Objects invite action. People appear welcoming. The future feels expansive. When someone is depressed, the world contracts. Activities lose meaning. Time slows. Even familiar spaces feel strangely distant. The mood does not remain locked within the mind. It transforms the appearance of reality itself. Heidegger calls this phenomenon the disclosure of the world. Through moods, the world shows itself in different ways. Our emotional states reveal the structure of existence that ordinary thinking tries to hide. Most moods still operate within the everyday world, shaped by the they. Joy, irritation, excitement, disappointment, all occur within the familiar patterns of daily life. They influence how we move through routines, but they rarely challenge the deeper structure of existence. But one mood breaks through this surface completely: anxiety. Anxiety is different from fear. Fear always has an object. A person fears illness. A student fears failure. A traveler fears an approaching storm. Fear points toward a specific threat that can be identified and confronted. Anxiety does not work this way. In anxiety, there is no clear object. The individual feels uneasy, exposed, unsettled, yet cannot point to a particular danger. The world itself seems strangely unstable. Heidegger insists that this strange quality is precisely what makes anxiety philosophically important. Because anxiety does not reveal a specific threat, it reveals the fragility of existence itself. In anxiety, the familiar world begins to dissolve. The network of meanings that normally structures daily life grows uncertain. Activities lose their obvious purpose. Conversations feel hollow. The routines that once provided stability appear strangely artificial. The individual senses something unsettling. The structures of the they no longer feel convincing. The voices of society that once guided behavior grow distant. The phrases people repeat about success, achievement, and normal life suddenly sound empty. The individual becomes aware that these patterns never possessed absolute authority. They were simply habits shared by the crowd. Anxiety strips away this illusion. It exposes the naked condition of Dasein, standing alone before existence. In this moment, the individual confronts a disturbing realization. There is no ultimate script determining how life must unfold. The social roles that once seemed fixed appear contingent. The paths that society presents as obvious reveal themselves as only one possibility among many. Existence opens. This opening produces both terror and freedom. Without the protective structure of the they, the individual must confront the raw fact that life has no predetermined meaning. The familiar markers that once guided decisions lose their certainty. Yet this loss also reveals a hidden truth. The individual possesses the power to choose. Anxiety, therefore, reveals the fundamental structure of freedom. Human existence is not bound by an essential blueprint. Each person must create meaning through the decisions they make. This realization is overwhelming. It is far easier to return to the comfort of the crowd, to accept the familiar roles offered by society, to silence the voice that asks deeper questions about existence. Most people choose this retreat, but anxiety leaves a trace that cannot be completely erased. Once the individual has glimpsed the openness of existence, the routines of everyday life never feel entirely secure again. Something continues to whisper beneath the surface. Heidegger describes anxiety as the moment when the world withdraws. The familiar meanings that once organized experience recede. What remains is a strange emptiness. But this emptiness is not meaningless. It reveals the underlying structure of existence itself. In anxiety, Dasein encounters the nothing. This phrase can easily be misunderstood. Heidegger does not mean literal nothingness. He refers to the collapse of the everyday meanings that normally fill the world. When these meanings fade, the individual confronts the bare fact that existence has no fixed foundation. Life stands open. This confrontation produces a radical shift in awareness. The individual no longer experiences life simply as a sequence of tasks. Instead, existence itself becomes visible as a question. Why am I here? What should I become? What gives meaning to the limited time I possess? These questions do not arise from philosophical curiosity alone. They emerge from the existential shock that anxiety delivers. Heidegger insists that this shock is not a malfunction. It is a revelation of truth. Anxiety discloses the condition of human existence more honestly than the comfortable routines of everyday life. It reveals that beneath the social masks and habitual patterns lies an open horizon of possibility. The individual must choose how to live. Yet anxiety does not simply deliver freedom. It also exposes vulnerability. When the familiar world withdraws, the individual becomes aware of the fragile nature of existence. Life appears temporary. Projects appear uncertain. Even identity feels unstable. The individual senses that everything could vanish. This realization produces a profound transformation in how the world appears. Objects lose their ordinary familiarity. Activities feel strangely distant. The individual stands outside the comfortable flow of daily life. Heidegger describes this experience as uncanniness. The German word he uses suggests a feeling of not being at home. In anxiety, the world no longer feels completely familiar. The individual experiences existence as something strange, something that cannot be fully explained or controlled. This strangeness carries an important message. Human beings are not completely at home in the world. Despite all attempts to build stable societies, technologies, and systems, existence remains fundamentally open and uncertain. Beneath the structures of everyday life lies a deeper reality that resists final explanation. Anxiety allows Dasein to glimpse this deeper layer. Yet Heidegger does not leave the individual trapped in this unsettling experience. He believes anxiety opens a path toward a more authentic mode of existence. Because once the illusions of the they dissolve, the individual can begin to reclaim personal responsibility for life. Instead of following anonymous expectations, one may choose actions that arise from genuine reflection. This movement marks the beginning of authenticity. Authenticity does not mean rejecting society or living in isolation. It means recognizing that the patterns of the crowd do not determine one's existence. The individual must decide how to inhabit the possibilities of life. But making such decisions requires more than freedom alone. It requires understanding the deeper structure that shapes human existence itself. And beneath the experiences of anxiety, freedom, and possibility, Heidegger uncovers a more fundamental truth about what it means to be human. A structure that silently organizes every moment of existence, whether we recognize it or not. Human existence is not built on reason, it is built on care. This is the structure that lies beneath everything Heidegger has uncovered so far. Beneath anxiety, beneath freedom, beneath the collapse of the day, beneath the fragile openness of possibility. If we strip away every superficial description of the human being, something deeper remains. The human being is the being that cares. This statement must be understood with precision. Care does not mean kindness or sympathy. It does not describe emotional warmth or moral virtue. Heidegger uses the word in a far more radical sense. Care describes the fundamental structure of existence itself. To exist as a human being means that one's own being is always at stake. We do not simply exist like stones resting in a field. We are always concerned with what we are becoming. Our existence constantly points beyond itself toward possibilities that must be realized or abandoned. Life is never finished. The human being stands inside a field of potential futures and must continually move toward one path while leaving countless others behind. Every decision reshapes the horizon of existence. Every action reveals what kind of being one chooses to become. This restless orientation toward possibilities is care. Heidegger argues that care forms the deepest structure of Dasein. Everything we have examined until now emerges from it. Being in the world, engagement with tools, immersion in society, anxiety before existence. All these phenomena grow from the same root. The human being is never neutral toward its own life. We are always already invested in what happens next. This investment shapes every moment of existence. Even when we attempt to escape responsibility, the escape itself becomes a form of care. Ignoring one's life is still a way of relating to it. Indifference itself becomes a decision about how to exist. There is no position outside care. Heidegger describes this structure through a striking image. Human existence stretches across time like a tension between three dimensions. The past, the present, and the future are not separate compartments of experience. They interweave to form the living structure of care. The past appears as what Heidegger calls thrownness. Each human life begins within conditions that were never chosen. Family, language, culture, body, historical moment. These elements form the background into which the individual is thrown. Thrownness does not imprison us completely, but it shapes the terrain on which freedom operates. Every choice must begin from the situation already given. The future appears as projection. Design constantly projects itself toward possibilities that have not yet been realized. We imagine careers, relationships, creations, achievements. Even the simplest plan for tomorrow expresses this forward movement. Projection gives direction to life. The present appears as involvement. At any given moment, we are engaged with tasks, conversations, decisions, responsibilities. The present gathers the past and the future into concrete activity. What we have been thrown into and what we project ourselves toward meet within the actions we perform now. These three dimensions form a unity. Care is the structure that binds them together. To exist as a human being means to live within this tension between what has already been given and what still remains possible. Life unfolds as an ongoing project shaped by both inheritance and decision. Heidegger insists that understanding care transforms the way we think about identity. Most people believe identity is something stable, a set of characteristics that defines who someone is. Personality traits, beliefs, abilities, social roles. But the structure of care reveals a different truth. Human identity is not fixed. It is constantly unfolding. Because existence always points toward possibilities that have not yet been realized. The meaning of a life cannot be fully determined at any single moment. What we are depends partly on what we have been and partly on what we still might become. The self is not a completed object. It is a living trajectory. This insight explains why human life often feels unstable. We sense that our identity is never entirely secure. Decisions made today may reshape everything tomorrow. Opportunities may open or disappear. The path of existence remains uncertain until the very end. Care is the source of this uncertainty. Yet it is also the source of meaning. Because without care, nothing would matter. Objects would appear meaningless. Decisions would lose significance. Time would become an empty sequence of moments. Care gives weight to existence. Through care, the world becomes meaningful. The projects we pursue matter because our being is involved in them. Relationships matter because our lives are bound together with others. Even failure matters because it alters the possibilities available to us. Life becomes serious precisely because we care. Heidegger's analysis exposes a powerful illusion that dominates modern thinking. Many people imagine that meaning can be discovered objectively, as if purpose existed somewhere outside human life, waiting to be found. But care reveals that meaning arises from involvement. Meaning emerges from the fact that human beings are always invested in their own existence. The significance of life grows from the structure of care that binds past, present, and future into a single movement. This movement can unfold in different ways. When individuals lose themselves in the patterns of the day, care becomes absorbed into social expectations. Projects are pursued because society defines them as valuable. Life follows established routes. In such cases, the structure of care still operates, but it remains hidden. The individual does not consciously claim responsibility for their own existence. They simply inherit the priorities of the crowd. But when anxiety exposes the emptiness of these inherited patterns, care becomes visible again. The individual recognizes that existence is not predetermined by anonymous voices. One must choose how to care. This realization produces a shift in responsibility. Instead of asking what society expects, the individual confronts a more unsettling question. What kind of life am I willing to stand behind? Authentic existence begins when care becomes conscious. The individual acknowledges that life is a project that must be owned rather than inherited. Choices are no longer justified by social approval alone. They are measured by whether they express the possibilities one truly chooses to pursue. Authenticity does not remove uncertainty. It intensifies it. Because once individuals recognize that their lives are not dictated by the they, the full weight of possibility becomes unavoidable. The responsibility for shaping one's existence can no longer be delegated to society. Each decision becomes a declaration about what matters. Yet Heidegger warns that even authentic care remains incomplete without confronting another dimension of existence. The structure of care stretches toward the future, but that future is not endless. Every project unfolds within limits. The human being lives inside time, and time carries a boundary that cannot be escaped. No matter how many possibilities appear, all of them eventually encounter a final horizon. Care, therefore, moves within a finite field. Most people avoid thinking about this boundary. Society encourages distraction. Work, entertainment, and ambition fill the hours so that the deeper structure of time remains hidden. But the truth cannot be postponed indefinitely, because somewhere within the movement of care, another silent possibility accompanies every life. A possibility that does not belong to society, cannot be shared with others, and cannot be avoided through routine. It waits patiently at the edge of every future. There is a voice that does not belong to society. It speaks without sound. It does not argue, persuade, or explain. It calls. Heidegger names this phenomenon conscience. But this word must be rescued from its ordinary meaning. Conscience is often interpreted as a moral judge that tells us what is right and wrong, a voice of ethical instruction inherited from religion or social norms, a mechanism that enforces rules. Heidegger strips away this interpretation completely. Conscience is not a moral lecture. It is an existential summons. It does not tell the individual what actions are correct. It does not deliver commandments or guidelines for behavior. Instead, it performs something far more radical. It calls the individual back to themselves. To understand this claim, we must return to the condition described earlier. Human beings usually live absorbed in the world of the they. Everyday life fills our attention with routines, conversations, goals, and expectations that originate from society. The crowd speaks constantly. It tells us what success looks like. It tells us what happiness should resemble. It tells us how to speak, how to behave, what to pursue, and what to avoid. Inside this noise, the individual gradually forgets something essential. One forgets that existence is one's own. Life begins to unfold according to borrowed scripts. Decisions are made because they appear reasonable within social standards. Careers are chosen because they promise recognition. Relationships are maintained because they follow expected patterns. Nothing seems unusual about this. Yet Heidegger insists that beneath this ordinary life, another possibility quietly waits. A possibility that cannot be defined by society because it belongs to the singular existence of each individual. This possibility emerges when conscience calls. The call of conscience is strange. It does not arrive as a clear message. It does not explain what to do next. Instead, it interrupts the comfortable flow of everyday life. Suddenly, the voices of the they lose their authority. The individual senses a quiet disturbance beneath familiar routines, a feeling that something essential has been overlooked, that the life being lived may not truly belong to the person living it. This disturbance does not accuse or condemn. It simply calls. Heidegger describes the call of conscience as a summons from the self to the self. Yet, this description can be misleading if interpreted psychologically. The call does not originate from conscious reasoning. It emerges from the deeper structure of existence itself. Dasein calls itself out of the lostness of everyday life. The message of this call is paradoxically silent. It does not present arguments or instructions. Instead, it communicates through absence. It reminds the individual that something has been forgotten. That something is the responsibility of existence. In everyday life, people often avoid recognizing how radically responsible they are for their own lives. Society provides convenient explanations for nearly everything. Circumstances are blamed, expectations are followed, traditions are respected. The individual can always claim that life unfolded this way because it had to. The call of conscience destroys this illusion. It reveals that even within the structures of society, the individual remains responsible for how they exist. No external system can fully determine the meaning of a life. Each person must stand behind the decisions they make. This realization can feel unsettling. When conscience calls, the protective shield of the they begins to weaken. The comfortable anonymity of social existence dissolves. The individual stands exposed before the open question of who they truly are. Heidegger calls this experience the awakening of guilt. But once again, this term must be understood differently from everyday morality. Guilt in Heidegger's sense does not refer to wrongdoing or moral failure. It refers to the fundamental condition of human existence. To exist as Dasein means to be guilty. This statement sounds shocking until its meaning becomes clear. Human beings are guilty because they are always responsible for choosing among possibilities. Every decision excludes countless alternatives. Every action defines what one becomes while abandoning other paths. We are guilty of not being everything we could have been. The structure of care described earlier guarantees this condition because life unfolds as a project moving through possibilities. Each moment forces the individual to commit to certain paths while leaving others unrealized. Existence therefore carries a permanent incompleteness. No life can fulfill every potential. No individual can explore every possibility. The horizon of human freedom always exceeds the time available to realize it. Guilt names this structural limitation. The call of conscience reveals this condition. It reminds the individual that existence cannot be reduced to comfortable routine. Life is not merely a sequence of socially approved actions. It is a finite project that must be owned. When the call is heard, the individual faces a decisive choice. One may retreat back into the familiarity of the they. The noise of society quickly returns, offering explanations, distractions, and reassurances. Or one may respond to the call. Responding does not mean abandoning society or rejecting relationships. It means recognizing that the authority of the crowd does not determine one's existence. The individual must claim responsibility for the possibilities they choose to pursue. This response marks the emergence of authenticity. Authenticity does not mean perfection or heroic independence. It simply means that the individual acknowledges the truth revealed by conscience. My life is my responsibility. Authentic existence requires a transformation in how one relates to everyday life. The structures of society remain present, but they no longer dictate identity completely. The individual participates in the world, while remaining aware that their existence cannot be reduced to social roles. Work may still be performed, conversations may still occur, traditions may still be respected, but the individual no longer disappears inside them. Authenticity, therefore, involves a certain form of solitude, even within community. The individual recognizes that no one else can ultimately choose their life. Advice may be offered, expectations may be imposed, but the final responsibility remains singular. One must stand alone before existence. This solitude does not isolate the individual from others. Instead, it deepens relationships. When a person lives authentically, they no longer interact with others merely through borrowed social scripts. Encounters become more genuine because they arise from a self that has confronted its own existence. Yet authenticity also intensifies another realization that Heidegger believes cannot be avoided forever. Because the responsibility revealed by conscience unfolds within a limited horizon, every decision we make moves us toward an endpoint that cannot be postponed indefinitely. Every project, every ambition, every relationship unfolds within time. And time carries a boundary that no individual can cross. The call of conscience, therefore, points beyond itself. It reminds the individual not only that life must be chosen, but also that the opportunity to choose does not last forever. Beneath the freedom of existence lies a deeper certainty that shadows every possibility, a certainty that remains silent in everyday life, yet waits patiently within the structure of time itself. Death is not an event at the end of life. Death is the horizon that gives life its seriousness. This claim stands at the center of Heidegger's most unsettling insight. Modern culture prefers to treat death as a distant accident that interrupts existence, something that happens later, something medical systems will manage, postpone, or soften. A biological failure that belongs to hospitals, statistics, and private grief. But Heidegger strips away this comfortable illusion. Death is not simply something that happens to us one day. It is something that defines us every day. To understand why, we must return to the structure of care that shapes human existence. Dasein lives as a project moving toward possibilities. Every decision opens certain paths and closes others. Life unfolds as a movement toward what has not yet occurred. But every projection toward the future carries an unspoken condition. The future is finite. This finitude is not an abstract idea. It is the most certain possibility any human being possesses. Everything else in life may or may not happen. Success may arrive or fail. Relationships may endure or collapse. Plans may succeed or dissolve. But one possibility never disappears: death. Heidegger calls death the ownmost possibility of Dasein. This phrase must be understood carefully. Death is ownmost because no one can die in our place. Others may accompany us, mourn us, remember us, but the experience of death belongs entirely to the individual whose life ends. It cannot be delegated, it cannot be shared, it cannot be escaped by dissolving into the crowd. In everyday life, people attempt to hide this truth. Society develops countless strategies to soften the reality of death. Language becomes vague. People say someone passed away, someone was lost. Someone is no longer with us. The word death itself is avoided. The media presents death as distant tragedy affecting strangers. News reports list numbers. Historical narratives transform death into heroic sacrifice or statistical inevitability. The individual learns to treat death as something that happens to others. This is the work of the they once again. The crowd whispers that death is unfortunate, but ordinary, something that happens eventually, but not yet. The individual is encouraged to continue living as if the horizon of existence were safely distant. Heidegger calls this attitude the covering over of death. In everyday life, death becomes abstract. We speak about it, but do not confront it. We imagine it happening somewhere far away in time. The urgency of our own existence disappears beneath this illusion of postponement. Yet this illusion cannot survive forever. Because death is not merely an event waiting in the future. It is the boundary that shapes every possibility in the present. Without death, life would lose its structure. Imagine a life without limits. Endless time stretching forward without conclusion. Every decision could be reversed later. Every project could be postponed indefinitely. Nothing would demand urgency because the future would never close. Meaning would dissolve. The seriousness of choice emerges precisely because time is limited. When possibilities are finite, decisions acquire weight. Each path chosen consumes time that can never be reclaimed. Death silently gives importance to every moment of life. Heidegger calls the authentic recognition of this truth being toward death. This phrase does not mean obsessing over mortality or living in constant fear. It means acknowledging that the horizon of death accompanies every possibility we pursue. Life is not merely moving toward goals. It is moving toward an end. When this truth becomes clear, the structure of existence changes dramatically. The illusions maintained by the they begin to crumble. The social scripts that once appeared convincing lose their authority because the crowd cannot die our death. The expectations of society suddenly appear fragile when placed beside the certainty of mortality. Career ambitions, social approval, public reputation, these may still matter, but they can no longer serve as ultimate foundations for existence. Death strips away borrowed meanings. It forces the individual to confront a direct question. If life is finite, how should it be lived? This confrontation does not produce comfortable answers. Instead, it produces clarity. The individual begins to see that many everyday concerns are distractions from the deeper responsibility of existence. Trivial conflicts lose importance. Superficial ambitions fade. The pressure to conform weakens. Death reveals what truly matters. Heidegger insists that this revelation does not diminish life, it intensifies it. When individuals recognize their mortality, time becomes precious. Moments are no longer treated as disposable units in an endless future. Each day carries the weight of irreversibility. The future narrows. And paradoxically, this narrowing opens freedom. Because when the horizon of death becomes visible, the individual can no longer hide behind indefinite postponement. Decisions must be made now. Possibilities must be embraced or abandoned within the limited time available. Life becomes urgent. Authentic existence emerges from this urgency. The individual no longer lives according to anonymous expectations, but according to the recognition that time is finite. Every project becomes a declaration. Every commitment becomes a statement about what deserves the remaining portion of existence. Heidegger emphasizes that this transformation does not require dramatic gestures or heroic rebellion. Authentic being toward death may appear quiet from the outside. One may continue working, speaking, participating in society, but internally the structure of life has changed. The individual understands that existence cannot be postponed indefinitely. Death becomes a silent companion that clarifies priorities. It stands at the edge of every decision, reminding us that time cannot be recovered once spent. Yet this confrontation also reveals another dimension of existence. Death does not merely end life, it reveals the deepest truth about human temporality. Because when individuals face the certainty of death, they begin to understand that existence is not simply a sequence of present moments. Life stretches across time. The past shapes who we are. The future calls us forward. The present gathers these dimensions into action. Death marks the boundary that gives this entire structure coherence. Time itself becomes visible. Heidegger therefore argues that understanding death leads to a deeper understanding of existence as a temporal phenomenon. Human life cannot be explained by analyzing isolated moments. It must be understood as a movement across time toward a finite horizon. And once this temporal structure becomes clear, another transformation begins to appear. Because the modern world increasingly attempts to escape this confrontation with finitude, technology promises control, efficiency promises mastery, systems promise stability. Human beings begin to imagine that the uncertainties of existence can be managed through calculation. Yet beneath these ambitions, the truth of finitude remains. And it is precisely here, at the intersection between technological power and existential limitation, that another question begins to rise. Technology does not simply change the world, it changes the way the world appears. This is the final warning hidden inside Heidegger's philosophy. After uncovering the forgotten question of being, after exposing the structures of Dasein, the world of tools, the domination of the they, the revelation of anxiety, the weight of care, the call of conscience, and the horizon of death, another force emerges quietly within modern existence. Technology. Most people believe technology is neutral. Machines are tools. Devices increase efficiency. Systems help human beings achieve goals faster and more accurately. The narrative of progress repeats everywhere. Technology improves comfort, extends knowledge, and multiplies human power. But Heidegger asks a more dangerous question. What if technology does not merely give us tools? What if it transforms the way reality itself becomes visible? To understand this claim, we must remember an earlier insight. The world always appears through a framework of meaning. Human beings never encounter raw reality without interpretation. Objects show themselves within networks of significance, shaped by how we engage with them. In earlier ages, the world appeared primarily as a place of dwelling. Rivers flowed as living presences. Forests stood as mysterious landscapes. The sky carried both wonder and terror. Human life unfolded within a sense that nature possessed its own depths beyond human control. Technology alters this appearance. In the technological age, the world increasingly reveals itself as a standing reserve. Everything begins to appear as a resource waiting to be used. The forest becomes timber. The river becomes hydroelectric energy. The mountain becomes mineral supply. The field becomes agricultural production. Objects no longer reveal themselves as independent presences within the world. They appear primarily in terms of what can be extracted from them. Heidegger calls this transformation inframing. Inframing is not a machine or a device. It is a way of revealing reality. It organizes the world so that everything shows up as something available for control, calculation, and exploitation. The danger of inframing lies in its invisibility. Most people believe they are simply using technology, but in truth, technology is shaping how they perceive the world. The technological mindset gradually becomes the default lens through which existence is interpreted. Efficiency replaces contemplation. Speed replaces patience. Optimization replaces understanding. The entire structure of reality begins to resemble a system of resources waiting to be managed. This transformation reaches its most disturbing form when human beings themselves begin to appear as resources. In modern systems, people are increasingly evaluated according to productivity, output, data, and performance. Workers become units of labor. Students become measurable scores. Attention becomes a commodity sold through digital platforms. Human existence becomes part of the technological order. This shift marks a profound forgetting of being, because when everything becomes a resource, the deeper question of existence disappears completely. Reality is no longer encountered as a mystery that calls for reflection. It becomes material for manipulation. The world becomes calculable. Heidegger does not deny that technology produces remarkable achievements. Modern medicine saves lives. Communication networks connect continents. Scientific instruments reveal aspects of the universe never before imagined. But these achievements conceal a deeper danger. The more powerful technology becomes, the more easily humanity forgets the question of being itself. Human beings begin to imagine that everything can be explained, controlled, and optimized. The ancient sense of wonder fades. The experience of dwelling in the world is replaced by the ambition to dominate it. This ambition transforms the relationship between humanity and existence. Instead of asking what it means to be, humanity asks how things can be used. Instead of contemplating the mystery of the world, humanity calculates its functions. The result is a strange paradox. The technological age possesses unprecedented power, yet it often lacks the wisdom to understand what that power is for. Systems grow more complex while meaning grows more fragile. People become surrounded by information, yet struggle to answer the simplest existential question: why live? Heidegger believes the deepest danger of technology is not the machines themselves, but the worldview they silently produce. When everything appears as a resource, even human life begins to resemble a project of constant optimization. Time becomes productivity. Relationships become networks. Thought becomes data processing. Existence becomes a technical problem to solve. Yet something within the human experience resists this reduction. Despite technological success, many individuals feel a strange emptiness spreading through modern life. Efficiency increases, yet satisfaction fades. Information expands, yet wisdom feels scarce. People sense that something essential has been forgotten. This feeling is not accidental. It signals the disappearance of the question that began Heidegger's entire investigation, the question of being, the question of what it means to exist at all. Technology did not create this forgetting. The forgetting began long before modern machines appeared. Western metaphysics gradually shifted attention from being toward beings, from existence toward objects. Technology simply completes this trajectory. It builds a world where everything appears as something usable. Yet Heidegger does not conclude with despair. Within the danger of technology, he sees the possibility of awakening. Because when humanity becomes completely surrounded by systems of control and calculation, the absence of deeper meaning becomes impossible to ignore. The very success of technological power may force humanity to confront the emptiness it cannot fill. At that moment, another possibility appears. The possibility of thinking again. Not the thinking of calculation, not the thinking of efficiency, but the thinking that returns to the forgotten question of existence itself. A thinking that listens rather than dominates. A thinking that allows the world to reveal itself rather than forcing it into systems of use. Heidegger calls for a more poetic way of dwelling in the world. This does not mean abandoning technology or returning to primitive life. It means recognizing that technology must not become the only way reality appears. The world must remain more than a resource. The forest must be more than timber. The river must be more than energy. Human life must be more than productivity. To dwell poetically means to remain open to the mystery of being, to allow existence to reveal itself without immediately converting it into utility, to recognize that the world contains meanings that cannot be measured or controlled. This openness requires a different attitude toward existence. Instead of seeking total mastery, humanity must learn humility before the mystery of being. Instead of reducing reality to systems, humanity must cultivate the patience to listen to what existence reveals. Philosophy, therefore, returns to its beginning. The question that Heidegger resurrected remains unresolved. What does it mean to be? What does it mean for anything to appear at all? This question does not belong only to philosophers. It belongs to every human being who awakens to the strange fact of their own existence. Because beneath technology, beneath society, beneath history itself, each person still faces the same silent confrontation that has followed humanity since the beginning. The confrontation with existence itself. Existence is not a problem to solve. It is a confrontation we cannot escape. Martin Heidegger did not offer humanity a comforting philosophy. He did something far more disturbing. He forced us to look directly at the question we have spent centuries avoiding: what it means to be. Western philosophy built vast systems of knowledge. It analyzed objects, reason, language, science, and logic. Yet, beneath all this intellectual construction, something essential was forgotten. The question of being itself disappeared behind the study of things that exist. Heidegger reopened this buried question. He showed that human beings are not detached observers of reality. We are the place where existence becomes visible. As Dasein, we live inside the world rather than outside it. Our lives unfold through tools, relationships, language, and shared structures that shape how the world appears. Yet within this everyday life, another force quietly governs us. The anonymous voice of society, the they, absorbs individuality and replaces genuine reflection with imitation. Most people move through life repeating patterns that were never consciously chosen. Then something interrupts this sleep. Anxiety strips away the familiar world and reveals the fragility of existence. Care exposes the structure of human life as a project moving between past, present, and future. Conscience calls the individual back from the crowd and demands responsibility for one's own existence. And finally, death appears. Death reveals the deepest truth of human life. Our time is finite. Every possibility unfolds beneath the horizon of an ending that cannot be postponed forever. This recognition gives weight to every decision and strips away the illusions of borrowed meaning. Yet the modern world continues to drift further from this confrontation. Technology expands human power while quietly transforming the way reality appears. The world becomes a standing reserve of resources waiting to be used. Even human beings begin to appear as functions within systems of productivity and control. In such a world, the question of being risks disappearing completely. But Heidegger leaves us with a possibility. The possibility that within the very danger of modern existence lies an awakening. When technology surrounds humanity with endless efficiency, yet fails to answer the deeper question of meaning, individuals may begin to sense the absence at the center of their lives. And that absence leads us back to the beginning, back to the question that philosophy once asked and then abandoned. What does it mean to exist? This question has no final answer waiting at the end of a theory. It is not a puzzle that can be solved and set aside. It is a challenge that accompanies every human life from beginning to end. Because each of us must still face the same confrontation, how we choose to exist within the limited time we have been given. And in the moment we truly face that question, the long sleep of forgetfulness finally begins to break.